utilization. And last but not least will be a good friend of mine, Jochen Sautter from Prime Consultancy. But before it, I want to give some announcement to you, ladies and gentlemen. After Jochen's presentation, we will open a question and answer. So you could write chat to me, or you could raise hand to talk lively. So Jochen, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Tirta. Ladies and gentlemen, selamat sore. It's a great pleasure today to talk to you, and hopefully after my presentation also enter into a lively discussion. As you have seen already, we have different angles of assessing what's going on. The legal and the entrepreneurial and also the investment perspective were nicely introduced. Let me get your attention from an overall perspective on what kind of elements I observe by staying in touch with a lot of different business people, colleagues and friends in Jakarta. Plus my experience in Indonesia goes back to the time when I moved there in '97 until today. So as you can see in this overview, my background is more on incubation, and I'm a generalist, and I have a big heart for property topics, leading me to building and managing the German center in BSD for 16 years. We do all sorts of elements on property improvement, brokering, help tenants to negotiate good deals. And our business scope leads us also to market entry topics. And as you can see, I have also background with European and German chambers. So this is our scope, and this is probably the credential I can put forward for discussing, first introducing and then hopefully discussing my personal observations that might shape into solid trends for the future. I'll go slide by slide, and I have for each trend only one slide, so you can easily predict. My presentation will be quite short and quite crisp. I try to put the good stuff more towards the beginning, some clear worrisome trends in the middle, and then towards the end we will see how you take that. So the good part, as also mentioned by Edward, not the whole property sector is in dire straits. Warehousing, logistic, e-commerce companies like Tokopedia and the others, they have been booming, and they are adding on also space. In general, ITC, whether it's telecom or whether it's digitalization trends, also lead to strong demand on property. Plus the consumer goods, when people are at home, they consume a lot still. And as a particular feature, I would say also the data center market before COVID in the years 18, 19 were already very strong, because we have seen Indonesia in the forefront of very strong, very dynamic digitalization trends, and portals have been coming up much more there than in the neighboring countries. So that's all leading to the need for data centers, and I would expect that within shortly 2-3 months time, those developments will go forward again. So this is the good stuff, and the good stuff will be the good stuff in the future. However, there's also a very severe crisis on suppliers and contractors, and I have been talking to several recently that tell me within the first quarter of 2020 they fulfilled the last job, and ever since then had no chance anymore to tender. So as the margin in the property construction and development markets for them is typically not really high, there has to be a real tough time with liquidity, if not bankruptcy developments that could start as early as end of this year to be expected. So as also you hear in webinars of banks, it needs to be stressed that cash is king, and those will survive that have the bigger polster or the better friends for finding money elsewhere. But typically they have to depend in such a situation on themselves. So if you are interested in takeovers or expansions in the contractors or supplier side, you have to find out how strong the liquidity base actually is. And that should tell you the main story. The second is what I find utmostly important for property analysis and prediction. Not too often quoted, but it's very easy to track. And that's the good thing. So anybody interested in this property sector should have a close look into the Consumer Confidence Index. Indonesia is famous to be on top of the worldwide league of having very high consumer confidence index. Over the last 15 years, Indonesia was most of the time among the top 3 in the world. And that means that more than half of the GDP, for instance, Indonesia is generating because of high levels of consumption. And as you see from this graphic on the right side, which I took from a publication of Bank Indonesia, where you can always go for good reference and good primary sourcing, that index dropped significantly from the longest time on the positive side, optimists above the line of 100, to 77. Green is the Indonesian value here. And I clearly suggest to everybody to keep an eye on this, because I don't see any chance for a turnaround of coming back to previous levels without the consumer confidence index climbing again. Now, trend number 3 is what are people actually nowadays expecting from properties. And this is as such a very broad range, and I decided to focus on the office perspective, because maybe in the office perspective, there's the biggest change to note in the upcoming times. Housing, I would say, will remain the same as before, with the add-on that one is thinking about which room more eloquently to be used as a home office than before. But the effect on the offices that are hugely in place and will be very much more significant. We have luckily seen a good stage of digitalization and utilization by service providers. But I would expect that the trend of the last couple of years of what is called move to quality buildings, grade A buildings with high prestige and standard as such, might be championed and affected by real clever, intelligent other buildings. Because here you have to think about the flexibility on how rooms can be split and how service providers can set up shared facilities, and overall, of course, every European can be only spent once. One has to realize that now we see still stability, but simply also because the tenants that asked the landlord for discounts were replied to by saying, well, we as the landlord are not guilty for your misery. It was forced on all of us. So from a legal basis of the lease agreements, there's often not much chances for the lessees to request discounts successfully. But when the lease is over, then they start tendering. So what seems now to have been a stable trend might not be sustaining towards the end of the year. Many leases end by the end of the calendar year, or more and more materialize within 2020, I guess. Work from home, I mentioned it already, it's connected to trend number 3, will remain. Some hate it, others like it. It's a very personal approach and take from everybody. But there's people in Koskosan getting lonely, and others at home with 5 children, different generations, get frantic because they have no chance to find an hour of concentration. However, the overall take from almost everybody that I talk to is positive. Nobody would have dared the challenge to force this on companies as well as employees voluntarily. But the COVID-19 created it within days only. And luckily, we were advanced enough on digitalization and also, of course, not spoiled in Jakarta traffic condition and so on, that we actually have a quite positive experience, and major accidents because of work from home did not occur to my knowledge. So I think this is a trend that will stay on a certain level, in some industries higher and in others lower. But I would warn everybody that you cannot be sure that you're on a level that is forever low, and therefore I also included the picture at the top right, because even production scenarios, you can do so much from remote monitoring that this is probably staying forever, yeah, in one way or the other. People will also, employees as well as employers will raise the question, how much work is reasonably done in the office, and how much work is also as good as or even better done at home. And that has a side effect to trend number 3, that probably the demand on office space will decline too. Trend number 5, this is a real big issue that nobody could explain me consistently until the last word. Sluggish government support for macroeconomic reasons will remain, therefore, I think. Indonesia would be in general in a situation where the indebtedness allows a much stronger, higher financial support of companies and of privates, of property players and property users. But it's in the news already. There's a wide range of reasoning why, unfortunately, the flow of money did not happen yet. And President Jokowi is utmost upset about it. But the fear or the experience on well-meant money not reaching the desired recipients is a is a fatal, unfortunate, and probably a very dramatic topic in the near future, because government makes now the experience that yes, they can reduce the amount that they collect via taxes, but they cannot steer against the effects that business as such have to experience in the aftermath of COVID-19. Trend number 6. It's not yet a real good time for investments. Yeah. There's practical issues of being limited to go out and see the property that one would like to inquire. Private as well as corporate, global as well as national investors face this challenge, and it's unlikely that out of the paperwork and online experience, such decisions will be made in large amount to go to investments that cannot be visited. It's the matter of the investment prospects might also be lingering until a certain level of stress is generated. Yeah, but the interest of especially those players that are doing quite well might be quite high and still might be difficult to serve. Indonesian investors actually are nowadays also observed for keeping their eyes open for what is actually a good investment. That is typically done via property portals, but also via entrusted property brokers. And from the broker side, I also hear that actually they became in the last years already quite tired to introduce houses or villas or something like that to clients, because on one side the investment climate condition in Jakarta got very complicated. The pollution discussion you surely remember of 1819. So people with money tend to say we would like actually to go with our investment somewhere else. But the classic target market of Bali is also not so interested anymore, because it's considered also too expensive, too overbuilt, and yeah, a bit of an old story of a property investment. So there's secondary ideas floating, and I would expect they will, when the time is a bit cooled again, they will be seriously put on the table of neighboring markets like Singapore, or more and more to expect Malaysia. Kuala Lumpur is very convenient to reach from Jakarta, and Penang is already for several years a very pleasant place to go to holiday, or for Indonesians also known as a place where very high standard of medical treatment can be achieved. So I would expect that once the timing is there, also new topics with creative convenience, safety, health aspects might be looked at by investors. Trend number seven is a very concerning one, because when we look at what is driving the world and what is driving our corporate life, the oldest one is surely the search for profitability. And the profitability led to a big wave of globalization. And then when this was on a hype, we realized we're ruining our planet. So environment is another very strong driver of business, driver in its form of influencer that everybody agrees on, yes, it is of value and importance. The latest one, but also established already, is digitalization. Everybody wants to enjoy digitalization to a certain degree. But now, we like it or not, we might have to live with social distancing as an additional one. I'm brave enough to predict that this will stay for quite some time because it had a very, very harsh effect into everybody's life, and it's probably going on. We have no real good basis for optimism because countries like the US, Russia, and Brazil are still riding very, very high on their first wave of COVID numbers, and other countries like China, Australia, and parts of Europe are already affected by the second wave. So unfortunately, I don't see a real good basis for having trust and having hope that the social distancing will get away very soon. And because I was faced by the fact that I could not return from a trip to Penang in mid-March, I was going through the conditional MCO that is explained on the right side, which was very tough, but also shows you that actually the measurements applied in Indonesia came later, but there's of course a similarity in all restrictions that social distancing brings along into our lives and work conditions. So the property market will also accept it as a fact that visits to premises are often restricted and not allowed, and the change of the office climate, the office concepts, and so on. I think this social distancing is unfortunately an element to come for the next years. And finally, a lot of things nowadays that I personally experience has to do with the momentum span. There's changes announced suddenly, and as I personally believe that I'm a good planner and I do analyze carefully, I was caught often on the wrong foot. We have no personal experience to really have a comfortable approach for predicting what is next. Yeah, of course we're getting smarter by the day, by the week, by the month, but when it comes to making decisions around property, we have to realize that a lot will be key regarding the timing for the ones that put property on the market. It will be very critical, and they will try as hard as possible to stick to good property as long as they can. But also for the buyer, yeah, they could get caught on the wrong foot. And when we assess, I have friends here where we go on property review tours once a week. It's always the issue that, yes, the property looks nice, but what is the business model around it nowadays? Yeah, how strong is the market and how much restrictions we might have to face, nevertheless, of Penang being for more than 10 weeks free of COVID. So there's certain elements that are hampering and that are promoting the time of action could be closer or further away. What is a matter of concern and aspect is that what Edward explained into length, banks might not be there for helping out with a real good deal to get financing for. Yeah, so you have to assess your own strength quite well, or you have to early find co-investors. And right now, the rupiah recovered quite well, but is still lower, about 15% compared to the beginning of the year. So those that have strong hard currencies on hand, whether local or whether foreign investors, they could actually enjoy our benefit. But it's the momentum span can be very narrow, and it's not really certain to predict when it's there. So you have to prepare to be very well coordinated, like the ends that I put on this slide, for being ready, and shape your mind that you have thought everything through from A to Z on a daily basis, because the framework can change very quickly. So that's my analysis and prediction of 8 trends. And with Prime Consultancy, we are able to help you working around property advocacy, but we're also doing market entry, financial advisory, and HR services, often intertangled. And I would be very happy if one way or the other we could continue staying in touch with you after this webinar. And thanks for Tirtha to set it up. I'll return to you, Tirtha.
Okay, thank you very much, Jochen. A very nice insight, very clear insight.